Jenny and I both love watercress, and whilst there are some places local to me where I could probably just go and forage it directly out of a stream, I fancy having a go at growing some right here at home.
Now, as I mentioned in the intro, I could potentially just go and forage some watercress. We do have it around these parts. I could find a chalk stream, go and forage some watercress, but there are risks to eating wild picked watercress in the form of the liver fluke. Nasty little flatworm with a very weird and interesting life cycle. It has a couple of different host organisms, mammals of some sort, usually sheep, and water snails. Ends up becoming these little cysts which attach themselves to foliage, specifically foliage that's immersed in water, i.e. watercress. Now, commercial growers take steps to make sure that those risks are mitigated, but in the wild, if there's agricultural runoff, or even if there's just pasture upstream, you can end up with liver flukes attached to the watercress. And because they're parasites, they have a kind of vested interest in being ingested, and so they're not easy to wash off your watercress. Now, as I say, commercial watercress, such as I've got here, steps are taken to ensure hygiene and control those risks. Out in the wild, obviously that is not so, and I mean, what you can do is cook it. If you pick wild watercress, you can cook it, make watercress soup or something like that, which is nice enough. But of course, enjoying a nice bit of fresh watercress is also nice. So anyway, those risks will not be present where I'm growing it because there's no agricultural context to my garden. I've got no cattle in my garden or livestock, and the water I'm sourcing is coming from rainwater. It's not coming from a stream that could be contaminated. So if you want to eat it raw, which I do, then you've either got to buy it from a reputable source, or you've got to cultivate it yourself. Or I suppose you could pick it wild. There are ways to avoid it. I'll link to an article that talks about how you might avoid it. Anyway, that's lunch.
Watercress is a plant in the mustard family that's commonly found growing in and beside flowing streams, particularly chalk streams. It's not exactly expensive, but you don't get a lot for your money, and often it's a bit beaten up and bruised when you get it in a bag like this. It likes to grow in and around rivers with its roots in water. It's possible to cultivate it at home just by growing it in a pot and watering it very thoroughly and frequently. Alternatively, there's a related plant called American landcress, which is actually a native of southern Europe and Asia, which can be grown in a more conventional vegetable garden without all of that water. But I fancy trying to set up my own little watercress beds. Commercial cultivation of watercress is normally done close to a natural chalk stream. Water is drawn from the river and contains all of the nutrients required by the plants to grow. I'll link to a couple of videos about the commercial cultivation of watercress in the description and cards. So I want to do something like that, but on a much smaller scale, which I'm going to do by setting up an artificial watercourse in these two little plastic planters. They're supplied without any drain holes, so that's ideal. I drilled a hole in one side and fitted this overflow spigot. I've got a couple of these spare that were supplied with water butts years and years ago, but I didn't need them as the diverter I used had its own built-in overflow. The other trough will get a similar hole in the end, the reason being that I want to set these up so that water is added to one end of the first one, then it overflows into the opposite end of the second trough, and finally overflows out of the second back into a tank or reservoir. I'm going to need some sort of stand for this to elevate one of the troughs above the other and elevate both of them above the water tank. This I'm going to build out of an old pallet, so here we go, pallet transformation montage.
Looks good. That's all that's left of the pallet.
So now we've got the step stand where one trough is higher than the other. I'm going to set this up in the vegetable garden in front of the greenhouse. It will cast a tiny bit of shade on the greenhouse, and this might not be the best place for it permanently, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. If this doesn't work out, I can easily move it elsewhere later. Just a little test with water only first to make sure the levels are about right, and that we don't lose any water from around those overflow fittings. So this is sort of a hydroponic setup, but the growing medium is going to include some soil. Now, to fill the troughs, I want to emulate a flowing stream where there's a moving watercourse and next to it an earth bank. This is a 50-50 mix of peat-free multi-purpose compost and some soil from my garden, which as you can see has chunks of chalk in it. A little bit of gravel in the bottom first to create a space for flow. Then I'm using a piece of weed suppression fabric to contain the soil over at one side of the trough. The other side I'm backfilling with washed gravel. Then more gravel on top of the soil to emulate the gravelly edge of a river. It might be a bit difficult to see what's going on here, so here's a diagram of the cross-section of this whole thing. Now a test run with some water, and everything seems to be flowing about right. So in each of these troughs there'll be a reservoir of water below the line of the overflow spigot, and there'll be flowing water through the gravel bed alongside the soil, which will keep the soil nice and wet because that fabric stuff is porous. I also added some of these chunks of natural chalk I dug up so that the water will flow over it. The alkalinity of the water is something that watercress will love. Although there's so much finely divided chalk in the soil I added, I don't think these chunks are really necessary. I ran a couple of watering cans of water through it just to wash out any free sediment that was going to wash out, and now it's time to plant some watercress. You can buy seeds for growing watercress, but there's an easier way. I took a sprig of watercress from a bag that we bought at the market and stuck it in a glass of water on the windowsill. 2 days later it had tiny roots on it, a week later and there's a whole root system there. This plant likes being in water. So this first plant can go here at the top end of the watercourse, just making a small hole down into the soil and planting it there. I weighed down the stem gently with a piece of chalk, mainly to stop the wind from flapping it around, but maybe it will also put down extra roots here. And as an afterthought, I added a bit of protection from this piece of cut plastic bottle, since the cutting was started off indoors and I haven't given it any hardening off. Although I think this plant might actually be quite tolerant of big swings in temperature, since that cutting, before I rooted it, was in and out of the fridge for a few days, in that bag that we bought from the market. I will need a few more plants to go into this setup, so I picked a few more pieces from out that bag of watercress and put those in water. I probably could just stick them straight into the watercress bed and let them root there, but this way I can keep an eye on them and plant them in a week or so when they root. Cost of this setup so far has been pretty modest. I caught those plastic troughs in a sale, reduced down to £1.50 each. The overflow spigots were leftover pieces I already had. There's probably a couple of quid's worth of gravel there, and a little bit of bought compost. The pallet was free, and the extra screws I used were a few pennies. The most expensive part of this setup was this metal mop bucket I bought to use as a water tank. And there is a reason why I chose this. I intend to set up another filter in that draining section there. But to be honest, any old bucket would have done. So total cost so far is easily under 20 quid. And with watercress coming at maybe £1.50 a bunch, sometimes more, I'll only need to pick from this a dozen times and it will have paid for itself. And if this works, I'll be picking watercress that is fresher than anything I can buy. Now at the moment, this will need manual watering. Half a can of water in the top there, once a day, and letting it all just flow down through the system. The flow, by the way, keeps the water from stagnating in these containers. I do plan to add a small solar-powered fountain pump to this setup, so when it's sunny, that water will circulate on its own. This is going to add about £30 to the total cost of the setup, so it might seem a little bit frivolous, but I am still confident that this will still break even during the current growing season. I'm going to wait a few days before adding the pump though, because there's still a little bit of silt washing through the overflows, and I don't want that to just clog the filter on the pump. I'll wait until the water is running clear. The plants are going to need some liquid feed added now and again, and for this I will use my bin juice organic liquid compost. And this setup is completely freestanding, and watercress is a perennial, so at the end of the summer, as the days start to get colder, I'll be able to move all of this inside the unheated greenhouse and hopefully continue harvesting fresh watercress right through the winter. So that was my little project to set up a mini watercress farm. I'll post updates on how well this works or doesn't work in my regular random stuff series, so keep an eye out for that. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.